In order to explain how we're going to go setting up our facial rig, let's take a quick little look at this guy, which is the Oddfather face rig that appeared initially on my show reel. This is the Oddfather. Copyright Pete Sussy, www.sussydesign.com. Big shout out, buddy. And this is how it works. We have this joystick style setup, which is the Ossipa, however it's pronounced, style setup. And basically what it does is it maps the face to a bunch of controllers, and the pieces of the face are moved directionally. So for instance, you want the jaw to go down, this jaw controller goes down, you want it to go up, the jaw controller goes up, and so on. You've also got left and right, and then of course when you're animating you can animate pieces of the face in this sort of fashion. The advantage to this method is that rather than just using a set of one-dimensional sliders that bring your morphs up and down, is your controller animation and motion will match the motion of the portions of the face that each controller pertains to. That way you can easily animate in your arcs and so on and so forth. Using this kind of setup is what we call combination shapes for the face. We have a series of shapes built in, which are of course linked to these controllers, and it's through combining these shapes together that we get our eventual facial expression, rather than crafting morphs for each shape on its own. The point in this, and the reason it works so well in Lightwave, is what happens when your morphs overlap. For instance, if you create a morph where the face is smiling, and you create another morph for the letter F, you know, with the lower lip just tucked in by the teeth and so forth. If you need to blend from your smile to your F shape, and you've just got these two morphs, if you have, you know, these phoneme shape morphs, then during the blend, things often get a bit messy. Your geometry starts to break a little in between as the two morphs don't overlap properly. This is to do with what you see referred to as the vertex deltas. A morph is four pieces of information. It is a vector, which is an x, y, and z coordinate, and a scalar, which is the distance along that vector that each vertex or any particular vertex is moving, four values. A combination value commonly referred to as delta. Now in other packages, in some packages, it's possible to manage the way that these delta values overlap one another during animation by solving for them mathematically. I've never done blend shaping in Maya or anything like that. I've never done any setup for it, so I couldn't tell you the specifics of how it works. But just off the top of my head, I mean, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 values to contend with that you have to mix into one another. If I was going to be trying it, I'd start with quadratic equations to try and, you know, solve them and keep things in line as I was blending between one shape and the next. The thing in Lightwave, though, is you've got no such control at all. Morphs are always additive. If you have two morphs and you slide them both up to 100%, then the vertices, positions, their deltas get added on top of one another, and there's no way to change or alter or play around with that. For that reason, the old system of just, you know, modelling certain phonemes or expressions and then dragging sliders between them has never really worked very well in Lightwave. And the solution to it is this combination shape method. The only thing with combination shapes is you wind up with an awful lot of morphs, and having those fitted to just normal 1D sliders gives you an awful lot that you have to manage, and it's a real pain to animate. As you can see here, I've only got a few different controllers. These yellow things are obviously my controllers. I've got, I forget the count now, it's something like about 16 or 18 controllers here. But the actual model itself has over 117 endomorphs. That's just for the face. And so all of those have basically been consolidated down, just like we did, you know, with Romeo's foot rig. It's just having all of these tiny little controls that do a little thing predictably and then consolidating them down to a single controller. And that's how we're working. So let's take a quick little look at some of these shapes. You can see here the long list of morphs that I've got for him. How many you need or want in your character will of course vary from character to character, but as you can see, it is to get the maximum amount of control, you do want to go for quite a few. And they include things like the brows down, left and right, brows in, left and right, the brows out, left and right, the brows up, left and right. The other thing with these morphs is that they're built in opposition to one another. So you have the brows up and you have the brows down. And because of the way that we've set up the controllers for them, they won't overlap each other. So when the controller goes up, you only get the brows up morph. When the controller comes down to midway, both are at 0. And as the controller comes down, you get the brows down morph. And so by building your morphs in opposition in this fashion and building them for each piece of the face in isolation, it becomes much easier to control your face and construct your shapes from the control setup without worrying about the shapes overlapping one another too much. So let's take a little look at our Romeo, because I've set him up with some shapes here. I haven't got quite as many as I put in Oddfather, but I've got enough for our needs and purposes here. How much control you choose to build in is entirely up to yourself. You can go more simplistic, you can go more complex, it will vary. As you can see, I build my morphs symmetrically, so I've just got brows down, brows in, brows out. I will need to split these into left and right portions. Eyes angry, eyes closed, eyes sad, eyes squint, eyes wide, and so on and so on and so on. The only thing you need to keep your eye on when you are building your morphs is that you need to make sure you build them so as they do combine properly, so as you don't get weird shapes when you add them together, which is very easy to have happen when you just build your morphs in isolation from one another in this fashion. So to help us understand that, let's take a little look at our Janet character here. Right, first thing that we'll notice is what I tend to do a lot of the time with my characters is I build them in their base pose in this sort of half-asleep, dopey eyelids pose. If you've ever done morphing in Lightwave before on eyelids, you'll know that it's not uncommon if you start with your character with their eyes completely open. When you create a blink morph, as you slide the morph across, then the eyelid tends to penetrate the eyeball a little bit. Therefore, I have my base posed with the eyelids just a little bit closed, as if the character's sort of half asleep or just starting to drift off. And then from that, I will create an actual eyes closed blink morph and an eyes wide morph. And this will give you a nice function where the eyelids don't penetrate the eyeballs as they're closing and opening. The jaw, you can model in base pose in a couple of different ways. Here in Janet, you'll notice I've got her jaw base modelled with the lips just touching, so the jaw is nice and relaxed. You can see in the side view here the teeth are slightly apart, so the jaw's just in a nice relaxed pose, but where the lips are touching. Alternatively on Romeo, I've got him again the same, the jaw's in a nice relaxed pose, but the teeth are ever so slightly apart. In Romeo's case, when he closes his jaw, that brings the lips together, whereas in Janet's case, when she goes to her jaw close morph, then her lips squish together a little bit, as you can see there. Either of the two methods works there. You can pretty much use whichever you find most comfortable for your characters. But back to making sure that the morphs mix properly. For instance, I've got my jaw open morph. Okay, that's simple enough. I've also got, for instance, my mouth up morph, where the sides of the mouth come up. And because these are two reasonably different morphs, and of course the lip shape is quite different between them, when I combine the two, if I want to, open the jaw and raise into a smile, I might not get such a wonderful, deformation. The deltas might overlap improperly, and I'll get pinching or folding, especially at the corners of the mouth. They are always a bit of a issue. The way to solve for this is just to apply morphs to one another as you're building them to make sure that they overlap correctly. There's two ways that you can do this. You can either take your morph, apply another morph on top of it. So I could take, for instance, my mouth up here, go to my vertex maps panel and choose the apply morph function, applying the jaw open morph at 100%. We can see the issues there. This lip is coming through the teeth a bit. So I could then go model that to smooth it out a bit, get that working correctly. And then I would go back to apply morph, choose the jaw open morph again and set it back to -100%. And that would leave me with my mouth up morph that was corrected to operate correctly with the jaw open morph. The trick to doing this is to always the trick to doing it is to know what are your minor morphs and what are your major morphs. For instance, the jaw open is a major morph, whereas the mouth up is a minor morph by comparison. What I mean by this is I would correct the mouth up morph to operate properly with the jaw open morph, rather than correcting the jaw open morph to act properly with the mouth up morph. Okay? Now I can do it that way. There's another quicker way that you can do it. If you go to the DStorm website, there's a little plugin that you can get on there called Morph Map Mixer, which if you turn on the tool and bring up your numeric panel gives you a Morph Mixer style interface. Be advised, this does not just mix your morphs nicely so you can see what's going on, it actually applies the morph data, it applies the vertex deltas to whichever morph you have selected here. So you'll notice that if I bring up my jaw open morph here, you see I'm just getting the jaw open, I'm not getting the mouth up version of the morph until I slide it back out to nothing. For this reason, I often create a little dump morph just to make sure I don't accidentally apply things incorrectly to one another. I can use my little dump morph just to test how these things interact. So there we see that. Of course, I slide them back down to 0 afterwards to unapply the morphs. So let's say I go to my mouth up here, and I'm going to apply the jaw open and the mouth up. There we go. Just going to come in here, I'm going to tweak out these sides so as they're no longer intersecting with the teeth. If you want advice on how to model your morphs, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I do unfortunately have to do it an awful lot as a rigger and so forth, but I prefer not to whenever I can because I'm not a particularly good modeler. It's certainly not my strength. I'm not very well skilled at it, and I'm certainly slow when I try to model. But the best advice that I can give, and the way that I normally go about doing morphing and so forth, is I just select the area here that I'm working on. I use the magnet tool and just sort of drag bits around. I make sure to drag out a area around the area that I'm working on, and that normally gives me pretty decent results. So there we go, a couple of little tweaks there. So I fixed that intersection so the two morphs are now playing nicely together, and I can just go back and subtract again the jaw open from that, and that gives me my corrected morph. There we go. Because of course the way that, you know, Lightwave works with the separation of modeler and layout, and the fact that you can make adjustments to your model and that'll update your scene, you don't have to do this straight away. You can just model in your morph shapes, you know, the direction in which they're going to begin with. Then once you've laid in your controls in layout, you may well find that often once you're posing things up and testing out your control systems, that's when you'll come across more conflicts of overlapping morphs that don't work well together. I generally then tend to go back to modeler and start doing my corrections to make sure that the morphs do play together nicely. So the workflow of how you approach it, you can, you know, jump about between. The thing to notice though is how I am actually structuring these morphs. You'll notice, I mean, if I focus just on the mouth here, you'll notice that really I am not giving any kind of a realistic shaping to these morphs. You know, that is not an expression that you would normally reach with your mouth. It's a pretty unrealistic expression. The same for the mouth wide morph. It's not easy to actually, you know, pull your mouth like that with the muscles of the face. So these morphs aren't based on the facial musculature. They are based on direction. So you notice that the morph for mouth wide only stretches the morph in the x-axis here. I don't make any, you know, upwards fall off. Normally if you want to stretch your mouth wide like that, then, you know, the corners of your mouth naturally come up because of the way that the face muscles are structured. But for this control system, I don't bother building that into the main morphs. So you'll notice that the actual base morphs themselves are pretty unnatural looking. They don't look at all correct like real face shapes, and that's the trick to combination face shapes, is that the base morphs themselves often won't look very realistic. They will look like very strange facial expressions, but when you combine them, that's when you're able to build better facial expressions in layout itself. What you're really doing here is you are pushing the vertices in a direction that will match the direction that you push the controller. So for the morph down, those lip vertices are just going straight down pretty much. Obviously I'm, you know, making sure that my geometry is nice and smooth and my topology lines you know, my edge flow lines are nicely maintained. And of course I'm putting in any little bits of shaping that should be necessary for a certain morph or shape or whatnot. So I'm getting the lumping under the lower lip here for the mouth down, and for the mouth wide I am of course putting my, you know, creases and lines in the cheeks there. So you have that. But really what I'm doing is I'm just modelling morphs to push pieces of the face in the same direction that I'm going to push a controller. So again, it's basically just coming back to axial alignment, just like we were talking, you know, back at any other stage through the rigging or deformation or whatnot. It's keeping your controllers and your model, your topology, you know, in line with each other in a certain way so as their axes can marry together and everything works out. When you push a controller in a certain direction, you get a predictable result. Now when it comes to splitting your morphs for left and right, you can do it manually. I pointed out much earlier there was the TA morph split tool, which is exceedingly useful. Oh, you've got to be out of symmetry mode, sorry. The only thing to be sure with the TA morph split is that your symmetry does need to be dead bang. You do need to be correct with it, otherwise it will not work properly, or it will error. Here we go, we're going to choose certain end morphs to split. Obviously you don't want left and right splits for things like, you know, jaw open. That's incorrect. The script gives you a blend zone, so how far across it will blend between the left and right and so on and so forth. And just like when we were using the, you know, mirror and copy hierarchy and stuff, you can add suffix or append letters to things. So I'm just going to pick a few here, such as the brows down, the up, eyes angry, close, sad, wide. Leave all the jaw morphs alone and make these underscore L and underscore R. And if I look at my grid square size, it's only small, so I'm going to put a blend area of 10mm here, which would be about right, and hit OK. And there we go, just like that, we have all of our nicely split off morphs. Unfortunately, being a bit of a putz and forgetting, of course, the fact that in Lightwave, you know, you tend to model your models facing to the back rather than to the front. It inverts the way that left and right round is. So unfortunately, it's actually misnamed them. Never mind, when I brought up the interface, I should have swapped where I put underscore L and underscore R, and that would have been fine, but I'm just going to manually rename them. But I'll remember next time. It's a while since I used TA morph split. But if you don't want to use it or whatever, I don't know why you wouldn't, because it's pretty much automatic. You can do these all by yourself, of course. The trick is just to make sure that you get a nice blend in between on the center line. And I'll show you how to do this, because it's important not just for left-right splitting. For some parts of the face you also need to do up-down splitting, and unfortunately there isn't a TA morph split that will allow you to split between the upper and lower sections of something, because of course it works on symmetry. So let me just show you here. I take this little lips forward morph, which I'm using just to push the lips forward. Simply all I do is I just hide the teeth there. Is I select all of the vertices on one side of the mesh here, but not the center line itself. With those selected, choose copy vertex map. This is the left hand side, so this lips forward left. Okay, and go to the lips forward. Jump out of my selection, just copy it again. That's the lips forward right. Jump back to my point selection. Underscore key to remove the vertex map, or I could have used the wherever the tool is in the menu here. It's shift and minus, which is underscore, to remove it. As you can see, this gives me two not very pretty maps. Now for the left hand map, I select all those vertices on the center line there. Use apply morph. Choose the lips forward, 50%, OK, and that starts to smooth out the transition between one side and the other there. And then of course for the right hand side, which currently has the morph applied 100% to the center line of points, remember. So I select the center line again, remove them from the right hand side map, and again I add them on at 50%. And the result is that when both of these morphs, the left and right, are applied at the same time, you get a result that is equal to that. Now in this case I don't like it much. You see I get a harsh break on the upper lip here because my lines of vertices are quite tight. So in some cases such as this, whilst you would do a 50% on the centre line, you would probably go over to the next line and do a 75-25 split, and so on and so on. That's why the TA morph split is helpful, because it lets you, rather than doing the splitting by lines of vertices, it lets you do the blend by a distance in millimeters. And so if you do have close-up lines of vertices like I have on the upper lip here, that becomes a much smoother blend. You see it's worked well on the lower lip here because obviously that has fewer lines of vertices, so my manual adjustment with just a 50% on the center line is pretty much good enough. But generally I tend to use the TA morph split. As for upper and lower splits, the places where we will want upper and lower splits are going to be on the eyelids and the lips. So of course for morphs such as the eyes closed, I want a morph for the upper lid and one for the lower lid. And of course left and right splits, so I'll have upper left, upper right, lower right, and so on. And again for the lips, because we have morphs such as the lips open here, I will want to be able to open the upper or the lower lips. Don't mind her gumminess, I've just got her teeth hidden, and so on. Generally, I want to do my upper and lower splitting before I do my left and right splitting, otherwise I have to go and do the upper and lower splitting manually for both the left and the right sides. It's much easier to do your upper and lower split first and then do the TA morph split on those areas. So let me just show you this very quick. I'll show you the lips here, because this is a nice, simple enough one to do. I always take it from, again, the center line, because when you model your characters' faces, for your lips and your eyes, you should always have a center line of polygons or vertices or somewhere that represents the corner edge. And this, of course, is effectively your symmetry line, even though I know it's not symmetrical, but you know what I mean. It's your dividing line between the upper and lower. So splitting out upper and lower across this line is just the same way that we split out upper and lower across the center line for a symmetrical morph. So let me take my lips open, and I'm going to select the entire lower lip section. So there we go, I select just the lower lip section there, and copy vertex map, lips open, low, easy as that. Select any vertices that are going with the upper lip there, and again, copy it, lips open up. It's a good enough name for my liking. And so there we are, I've got separate open control over the upper and lower lip. So I do that, of course, for the eyelids and so on and so forth, whilst paying attention, of course, to where my corner lines are. The only thing you have to be careful of when you're doing this is that you don't accidentally catch vertices from, the opposing side into it, because you don't want any single vertex to get the same morph applied to it twice in both, when both the upper and lower are turned on. That will make a mess of things. You can also, if you want to be sure of doing that, you can use the old cell switch here, which will switch your selection between the vertices, the polygons and the edges, and that way you can just minus to hide them very quickly, making sure that you don't select the same set of vertices a second time, or you don't select just one vertex a second time by accident. And so there you go, just like that. So you get your upper and lower versions. Of course, if you want to check them, I can always, switch to my dump morph here and use the little DStorm morph map mixer just to double check. So, eyes closed low, eyes closed up, and there you can see the result of the two is the same as just having the one single morph. And I can check other areas, of course, like the mouth, to make sure that that symmetry stuff worked fine. If I do the mouth down left and the mouth down right, you can see that that's worked out just fine and given me the same results I would have had if I'd just used mouth down. So you can always check that your morphs are working out whilst you're working. If not, if you get into layout, it's easy enough to come back and do your little fixes. And that pretty much details it out for you, how it works. Like I say, I'm not going to go through every single morph here. You can look at the content and that'll let you know what all of the morphs are. You can look at that nice and easily, and of course you'll figure it out for yourself from character to character, and also we'll see where we apply a lot of them once we start setting up the controls. One last thing that I do want to mention before we get onto the controls is the jaw open morph. You do hear a lot of folks say about, oh, you know, when you open your jaw on a character, don't use a morph, use a bone, because of course, you know, the jaw is hinged and the morph is linear, it doesn't travel in an arc. First of all, the jaw is hinged, yes, but it does also have a little bit of lateral motion in it, so it doesn't move on a perfect hinge from a single point. So just putting in a single bone that has a single position for rotation isn't giving you accurate jaw movement either. Second, which is the most important point in my view, is, I mean, we've already seen about, you know, getting bones and deformations going on. You know, notice my jaw open morph here. You know, I'm reshaping the lips. You know, I'm making them into this slightly round shape to fit the jaw open morph, you know. I'm narrowing the geometry at the corners of the mouth, as happens when you open your jaw. That's not so easy to do with a bone. Or, rather, you would, if you wanted to do it with a bone, you'd need a bit of a compensation morph as well to get these lip shapes going on. So, when it comes to facial animation and facial shaping, I prefer to use morphs for everything because it lets you get absolute shapes. You can shape things exactly as you want them. If you start putting bones in, then you're limited to getting a shape on how well you can manipulate your bones and weight maps and so on and so forth. And whilst you can do that pretty well, if you want a little wrinkle here or a crease there, that's hard to do with bones, and you have to put in extra whole bones, and it's more work than it's worth, in my opinion. Also, and this is the real thing that makes me side completely on the side of morphs, is when you see a final rendered finished animation, I challenge anyone out there to actually spot the difference between a morph jaw and a bone jaw. So there you have it. And furthermore, the control that we're going to set up for this jaw, if you do want to have the jaw travelling in an arc rather than just a straight line when it opens, our control system will let us do that even with morphs. So there you go. Morphs all the way, my friends. Morphs all the way. So with that done, we will now jump into layout, and we will actually start laying in some of the controllers to get these guys on the go and start giving us our joystick controlled facial rig.